Do it.
All right, we should be live. Let me see. Hello, everybody. I don't know how many people are here. I'm going to find out in 1 second.
If it's in the thousands, that's a really good start.
It's not going to be in the thousands, but hopefully we get a good amount.
Yeah.
Let's see. Live chat. All right, we'll give people a few moments to tune in.
So Brandon, you say you're from the East Coast. What part of the East Coast are you from?
Well, originally I'm from New York, so that's where
Oh,
I
right
grew
on.
up.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm in Massachusetts right now.
Oh, right on. So
Mm-hmm.
it's you and your wife right now just living together?
Yep.
Right on, man.
Yeah,
Congrats again.
and you said you've been in California your whole life?
My whole life. I've traveled a little bit for military, so I've been on the East Coast myself, like Georgia, South Carolina. Got
Okay.
deployed middle back in 2020, so been a little over all over.
Okay. All right. Cool. Um, let's see. All right. I don't think anyone's in yet. Okay, here we go. Hello, Pig's
Fine.
Dream. Pig's Dream, since you're the first one here, can you hear me and our guests here? Yes. Okay, we're good. All right. Let's see.
All right.
Just giving a few minutes for people to come in.
Yeah, but we were a little tardy, so if anyone who was on the dot 8:30, they're like,
Yeah, it
we'll come
happens.
back.
I'm late to almost every single one of my streams, so it's not. People should be used to it by now. Okay. All right, everybody. Yes, people are coming in. Hello, God. Hello, Wesley Curry the second. All right, interesting names today.
Very interesting.
All right, cool. Hello, Vegan Stoner Lady. What's up?
That's quite the combo.
Let's see. Okay. All right. I think people are coming in. Okay, cool. So,
Okay, right on, right on.
so we could start with the introduction. So, everybody, thank you for tuning into the live stream. Those of you who don't know, my name is Brandon. I go by Logical Consistency on YouTube. I'm a vegan activist, at least online. So yeah, today we're having a more friendly discussion, debate, whatever you want to call it, between me and a somebody on Instagram who commented on one of my reels. So yeah, it was an interesting discussion, and they actually were good faith enough to accept the debate and actually want to come and talk openly. So that's cool. Kudos to him. So, Adrian, right? Do you want to start by a little introduction to yourself?
Yeah. So yeah, once again, my name is Adrian. Go by All American Tapia on Instagram. It's kind of my only social media right now, and of course YouTube. But yeah, I'm a Christian. I saw a little bit of Brandon on Instagram. I just want to get my 2 cents on like his position, and it kind of led down this little rabbit hole of like talking about discussion about why we think the way we do, and yeah, it kind of led to here, and I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, kind of from the stance of like pro-life Christian, but overall just more of a Christian aspect, not really a specific denomination. So in case I have any questions in the comments about that, yeah, just Christian.
Yeah, and just so everyone's clear, I did not get a firm handle. I put pro-life Christian in the title for views to try and generate some excitement. But yeah, I'm sure I'll give you a chance to clarify if you have some nuance or any specific to your position for sure. Okay. Cool. So I guess the best way to start this is to start, like I mentioned before the stream, I want to start with why we're here. It's because of a question you posed me. And actually, you're not the first person to pose this question. I actually get this question quite a lot, which I'm glad that you actually agreed to come on. So now we can just address that, and hopefully, anyone who asks that question, I'll just direct them to this video. So that's perfect.
Right on. Okay.
So the question that you posed me was, can you be pro-choice and vegan? All right, and
Mhm.
for just, I'm sure we all know what you mean, but just for clarity, when you say pro-choice, you're talking about the topic of abortion, right?
Yeah, top of abortion,
Okay,
more
cool.
specifically.
Yeah, yeah. So I am going to read my response. Now, before I read my response, I just want to make sure you're at least a little familiar with the terms. You might be, I just want to make
Mhm.
sure because not everyone is. So the
Yeah.
key thing in my response is the term sentience. So are you familiar
Mhm.
with sentience?
Yes.
Okay, great. And for those of you in the stream who aren't familiar with the term sentience, essentially sentience is the capacity for a subjective experience, right? Humans have it, most
Mhm.
animals have it. It originates in the brain and central nervous system, right? It's essentially being a subject to the world around you, right? Having wants, desires, being able to feel pain, joy, etc. So in my response, I'll get into that. I said, absolutely. I am pro choice up until sentience develops, separate from certain one off circumstances where later abortion may be necessary. And also, the
Mhm.
topic of abortion and sexual education in general, there's a lot of nuance because of socioeconomic factors, so that's aside, we're just talking morally here. So yeah, I am pro
Mhm.
choice up until sentience develops, separate from certain one off circumstances where later abortion may be necessary. Sentience, being an individual, is what matters and what should determine moral value. This position is consistent with veganism. Now, another
Mhm.
thing, when I say consistent, I mean logically consistent.
Okay.
So, again, you may know what that means, but for people who don't know in the chat and what my channel is based off of, logical consistency
Mhm.
means you don't have a contradiction in your view, right? So, like if I
Okay.
say I am against and I'm not against murder, right? I'm just speaking gibberish. I don't actually have a firm position, right?
Okay.
You can't affirm and negate the same proposition, or sorry, the same. It's called a proposition. Yeah, you can't affirm and negate the same, thing, because then you're just speaking gibberish and you're not being logically consistent. Um, that's what I mean when I say it's consistent with veganism.
Okay.
And then I asked, a better question is, can you be pro-life and not vegan without having a contradiction with your view? So I kind of threw it back at you.
Mhm.
So yeah, so that
Right.
is
Right.
my position. Veganism, I am vegan because I value all sentient beings in terms of thinking they deserve moral consideration. So I value sentience across the board. So
Mhm.
yeah, I will give you a chance to ask any questions, clarity, or pushback on my position at all there.
Yeah. So I guess the first question that popped in my head was, what stage of sentience would you allow? Like, would you, for example, like for extreme example, like would a cockroach be the same as a cow, for example? Like, is there a certain degree of sentience in that life for your stance to continue, or how would you define that?
Yeah. Well, so from my understanding, sentience is typically thought of as binary. So there are debates about
Okay.
this, whether it's like a human has more sentience than a cow, or a cow has more sentience than a rodent or something like that. So
Hmm.
it's not 100% agreed upon, but to me would make sense. Like there's varying levels of intelligence, varying levels of ability, varying levels of understanding, but sentience, right, whether you are an individual or you aren't, seems to me like it would make sense to be binary. So like
Okay.
either you are an individual or you aren't, and then everything else determines, how you act in the world and your uh, behavior, stuff like that. Um, does
Mhm.
that make a little sense?
Yeah. So what would delegate that yes or no, that binary, like you are sentient or you're not? Like, in your personal view, like what dictates that?
Yeah, and to answer your question, so when you say cockroach, so insects, different bugs, we're not 100% certain, or we're not like, there is like, I always try to apply the precautionary principle, but there's nowhere near
Mhm.
as much certainty behind like insects or certain sea life compared to actual mammals, birds, fish. Those are
Mhm.
pretty confidently assumed or asserted to be sentient. If you are
Okay.
interested there is there was the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness, but there's something newer called the New York Declaration of Consciousness, which is
Okay.
essentially all of the leading neuroscientists, philosophers, psychologists from various universities. They sign this declaration, and there's tons of studies and evidence that they link as well on the website. And essentially,
Right
it
on.
confirms birds and mammals are almost certainly sentient and complex, to that level. So something to check out. It's linked on my website.
Okay, right on.
But yeah, to answer your question, yeah, it's hard to compare a cockroach to a mammal or a bird because of the confidence. But again, I apply the precautionary principle. So long as we can, within reason, assume that they are sentient, they are individuals, then I don't see a reason why the moral consideration or the moral values I have for humans would be any different to those animals.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you kind of glossed over it, but would reptiles be in the same category as well, like the precautionary principle?
Yeah. So, and again, because
Okay.
we know sentience originates as far as we know, but we know sentience originates in the brain and the central nervous system. So obviously, if an animal does not have a brain or a central nervous system or something resembling that, because I know a lot of sea life, they have nerve ganglia, they have like structures that are consistent to like being very similar to a brain or nervous system. So again, precautionary,
Mm.
but yeah,
Right. I mean, like the
um,
whole organism doesn't really, yeah. Like they
yeah,
don't have like the same brain that as you or mammals, for example.
right. But they have ability to send nerve signals and stuff like that. So that's
Mhm.
why like vegans aren't opposed to eating plants, right? Because plants don't have a brain, don't have a nervous system, don't have anything that could indicate that they are individuals. Now, I don't know if you're one of these people, but I'll just address it in case so we could get that out of the way. Plants
Yeah.
are intelligent, right? So they are living, they are intelligent. They can communicate just like how my computer is intelligent, right? So they do
Mhm.
respond to stimuli. They do like their goal is to live in terms of like them being a living organism. But
Mhm.
similar to like bacteria, stuff like that, there's no actual brain, nervous system. They're not capable of being sentient as far as we know
Mhm.
scientifically. Again, if something else gets developed, that's different. But as of now, there's no reason to
Yeah.
assume that they're sentient like you and me or like a mammal or bird or something like that.
Gotcha. Okay. But yeah, I would agree with the same lines. I wouldn't say a carrot or anything like that would have the same sentience as you and I. So
Okay.
we're in common ground on that.
Cool. And that's look again, like you seem very even from the interactions, you seem very good faith. So I
Mhm.
really appreciate where you're coming from, and I think this will be a very interesting discussion because you
Mhm.
seem like a nice dude who's like genuinely trying to be honest and believes what he believes. So that's great. So that's awesome. Okay,
Right, and that's
so
kind of my goal with this whole discussion. I kind of want them to be like an understanding of like an understand from your side and my side. Because like I said, even with the audience itself, there might be someone who might say like, "Oh, can Christians be vegans? Does veganism co-align with Christianity?" You know, so if any
mhm.
questions like that arise, I hope we can address that as well because I think there is validity to either stance kind of like coinciding with one another.
Got it. Okay, great. So so yeah, so that's my you asked me like, the sentience difference. You asked me like what
Mhm.
determines sentience, brain nervous system, stuff like that. Now I guess because you didn't ask this, but I'm gonna address it because I feel like it's important. I'm
Okay.
assuming you would want to know at what stage does sentience do we know that sentience develops in a fetus, right? Based on I'm assuming based on
Right.
the question. So the numbers vary. There again, sentience, something like consciousness, is very, very
Mhm.
unknown. Like even between you and I have no idea for 100% certainty what is going on in your head, right? What's happening in your
Mhm.
head, your thoughts, your thinking processes could be something totally different from mine. But
Mhm.
by studying, human anatomy, by studying, how nervous system work, how brains work, we can intelligently and make a really, really good educated inference that you and I have very similar levels of consciousness and stuff like that. Um, but
Right.
um, based on what I've seen, and I'm going to give you conservative numbers as well, but based on what I've seen, just from a quick Google search, obviously, there's more research that needs to be done, but
Mhm.
sentience, or like the basic neural structures, start forming in a fetus between 18 to 25 weeks, right? So that's
Okay.
between like 4 and 6 months. Um, if we want to be ultra conservative, like definitely no potential for sentience, we could chop it down to 12 weeks, right? So cut that 25 number in half pretty much, 12 weeks, 3 months into
Mhm.
pregnancy. Um, so at 12 weeks, we almost certainly there's no chance of sentience. 18 to
Mhm.
25, again, I would say 25, 6 months being like the high end. I don't even know if I would be like 6 months is pretty like it's towards the end of the pregnancy. So that's pretty late.
Yeah, you're pretty like you're committed at that point.
Right. And then anything longer, I think they're like the fetuses are almost viable outside of the womb at like 8 months. So it's pretty close. But
Mhm.
again,
100%.
18, 25 weeks, 12 weeks if you want to be ultra conservative. So yeah, I would say that that is where sentience, as far as we know, is like we're safe. We're in the safe zone for not actually killing a sentient being. And yeah, I
Mhm.
don't see why somebody couldn't be vegan in terms of valuing like the rights of other sentient beings, not just humans, and also
Mhm.
pro-choice, where it's okay to control your reproduction, make decisions for yourself, so long as you're not killing an actual sentient being, just a developing cluster of cells at that point. So yeah.
Okay. And I think that's the common ground there. I think where a lot of people would have like butt heads, and I'm sure it'll be more aggressive versions of both our sides, is people who would claim to be vegan, of course, have like an importance and a value onto animals, but don't apply that same value on fetuses, anything above the 12-week mark that like you discussed. So I think, I mean, I would assume we have common ground there that it's kind of hypocritical to be the position of vegan, but okay with the abortion or killing of an unborn child 12 weeks and above.
Yeah,
Like,
and
what
I
would
would
you say to
say
that?
100%. Yeah, well, I would say that what's it called? When it comes to people who are typically pro-choice, almost none of them are vegan. So that's the thing, or even
Mm,
pro-life actually. So that's the thing. So
mhm.
like, there's the vegan community is pretty low. So like anyone
Okay.
who's talking like your typical, I would say your typical liberal or Democrat or whatever you want to categorize them as, who's typically
Mhm.
pro-choice, um, they're almost never vegan. Just because we're
Mm,
such a small group as it is. So yeah, I would say
right.
that like obviously there's disagreements among human rights and who should have them and this and that. But
Mhm.
um so yeah, I would say that if somebody was vegan and had the position that, and again, assuming socioeconomic factors aside, right? Obviously, and assuming cases of sexual assault, incest, underage
Mm,
pregnancies, like because there's a lot that goes into actual real world factors of reproduction. But assuming it's two
right.
consenting adults who had an accidental
Most general
pregnancy,
circumstances.
yeah, general
Right.
circumstances where like me and my wife, we're not trying to get pregnant, but if tomorrow we found out we were pregnant, right? So something like that
Mhm.
where we're both educated. Yeah, I can't see a position where you could be vegan, but then also be fine with, a 7 month, 8 month abortion, something like that, or like just not care about where in the development the baby is or the fetus is.
Mhm.
Now, that being said, again, I think that we should go off the science and, if the science definitely we know for a fact, or almost, pretty much for a fact that 12 weeks, no sentience, 18 weeks, still probably no sentience, and then 25 weeks potential, again, depending on where the development is. Um, I think
Mhm.
that there's no reason why we shouldn't have readily accessible, good, like, uh, I don't see why there isn't a reason why we shouldn't have readily accessible abortion, as like a medical treatment in that case, or just like another form
Mhm.
of birth control. But um,
Right.
but yeah.
And I think
So
that's where we would differ because I think this is where our our views kind of will like butt heads a little bit
mhm.
because obviously I'm pretty sure you've heard multiple times in the Christian point of view that we believe that life does begin at conception. that is kind of the line that we draw because we feel like it's the most consistent view. That anything beyond that point, you do draw a false line to anyone who is currently alive and present day. That's kind of the view we've developed. I think it's the most consistent view amongst Christians, and I would hope it would be the most consistent views in most populations. Um,
I'm sorry.
but where that stems from,
Can you repeat that one more time? I think I just lost that a second. Can you repeat that one more time? What the actual consistent position amongst Christians is?
would be conception. That's I'm sure.
Oh,
Yeah, I
okay,
would say
okay,
I'm sure you've heard that
conception.
most
Okay.
commonly. Yeah, conception was kind of like our line that we like because this is where we look at the science and say this is where the most consistent view kind of continues, where an individual is actually created with its own specific DNA, and the actual process of pregnancy starts from that point forward.
Mm-hmm.
We won't classify as a sperm cell being an actual human life. We don't follow that view. We don't think a female egg would be an individual as either. Only when they combine, fertilization occurs, and bam, conception. That's when we would dictate a human being being in the process of being created.
Okay.
So that's kind of like where our position would be if I would address it that way.
Okay. So, and I definitely want to ask you some questions about that and push you a little bit on that. But before
100%.
that, did you have any more questions about my position as it relates to? And I guess I am reading some comments here. I never actually. I don't know if you know what veganism is. So I'm just gonna explain that a little bit.
Okay.
Do you understand? Like,
Just FYI, your camera is frozen right now, so I just want to let you know it's kind of like me looking at that picture right now. Just so you're aware.
oh really? Okay. Guys, is it
I'm
frozen?
not sure that's my connection.
Yeah. Guys, is it frozen on the stream? Can you see me? Am I moving smooth?
It might be my Wi-Fi. I have the lower end.
Okay, looks fine in the stream. Okay, cool. No worries.
Okay. Cool. Just want to make sure.
So veganism, just to explain it like quickly, because I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Okay.
So veganism is not just like a diet, right? It's not just it's not anything for the environment or for health. Obviously, you can eat a plant-based diet for the environment, for health, but veganism is rejecting the exploitation of animals, right? So essentially,
Okay.
when we say exploitation, again, we're talking about using them, right? So whether it's enslaving them for zoos or entertainment, whether it's skinning them alive for clothing, whether it's forcibly breeding them for pets, whether it's eating them for food or breeding them for the purpose of food. So that's what veganism is. It's to put it into like practical terms.
Mhm.
We have a concept of human rights, right? Where we want to extend equality and rights to all humans. Essentially, me as a vegan, I want to see that for animals as well, right? I don't want animals to be outside of our scope of like moral consideration and given equal rights in terms of to the capacity that they can get those rights. So yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So does that make sense, or do you have any questions about that?
So I would guess I would ask what the long-term goal is then from that position. Are you looking for like dream scenario?
Mm-hmm.
Are you looking for like legislation to protect animal rights and protect them from being exploited? Are you just looking for like the common man just making a decision not to exploit animals or consume animals?
Both. Yeah. So I would
animal clothing.
Yeah, as whatever we can. Just like with I like when you think of veganism, I would want you to think of another justice movement like civil rights, like women's rights, like gay rights, like anything. It's essentially wanting both. We want people to stop viewing like from their own personal morality. We want people to stop viewing animals as just like objects, right? So like viewing animals as an inanimate object, like a table, for example, where we could just use them however we want. And then at the same time, obviously, realistically, to actually provide protection to these animals, we would want some kind of legislation. But that's only going to happen if more people get on board, right? Obviously, if 2% of the world's vegan, no one's going to put anything into law. But if 30% of the world's vegan, now we have something. So that's essentially what the long-term goal would be to a point where animals aren't exploited anymore. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Gotcha.
Okay, so we define veganism. We're on board that plants aren't sentient, animals are sentient. Obviously, humans are sentient. Babies at depending on the development. So, did you have any more questions about my position before I ask you some questions about yours?
No, I think I'm pretty on board.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're good on that.
Cool. So, all right. So, to your position, so you said and correct me if I'm wrong at any point, but it sounds like you said that you are in agreement with other Christians or with the Christian position that life or like the value of an individual should begin at conception. Is that right?
Yes, and yeah, just to kind of break down my position, if that to do that, I would say kind of like I said, we're in agreement with most Christian doctrine. Of course, there's denominations that we don't agree with, like of course, like with the Book of Mormon, with Jehovah's Witnesses. We do see that as like a separate branch of Christianity. Even some Catholics might disagree with us as well, but generally speaking, we're on the same page. Um, in case anyone wants me to clarify, I am a non-denominational Christian, so I don't identify with any specific branch. I think just Christians are Christians. I think the division in the church is kind of like a whole separate discussion point. Um, but yes, I would think most mainstream Christians or most common Christian would say that conception does begin life. That's where life would begin.
Okay. So, so what you're saying, because you didn't disagree when we talked about the sentience, right? So what you're saying is you're not so much disagreeing that sentience arises at a certain point, but you're just saying you don't just value sentience, you value the human life in general as it begins at conception, and that's why you're pro-life. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir. Correct.
Okay, all right. So I'm gonna ask you this. So the first thing I'm trying to
Okay.
understand is why just value life, right? So like, for example, especially when we're talking about like obviously a grown adult woman, grown adult man, these are fully sentient, fully conscious individuals who have an awareness of their life, who have a capacity for pain, joy, etc. So obviously I would say like, for example, right, if they were growing a carrot in their womb, right? For example, if a woman was growing a carrot in her womb, she would have a lot more to lose having to carry that carrot, having to pay for that carrot, having to whatever that's involved in pregnancy than the carrot itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why just value life over the rights of the individual woman, man, couple, whatever their position is?
Great question. I what I would say is the concept of innocent life. I think that is the key distinction. I'm more against the killing of innocent life because I'm not sure how many people would agree or disagree with this from my, I guess you could say group, but I'm very pro death penalty. I'm very pro self defense. So these are individuals who kind of lost that aspect to their life when they actually did wrong to other people, versus an unborn fetus or unborn baby, innocent, had no choice in being the position that we're in. Typically, if we're talking generally, of course, there are situations like rape and incest,
Mm-hmm.
but generally speaking, consensual sex leads to the production of these children who had no decision or any type of will to be there. And I think we can agree on that aspect because I'm sure you would agree that most farm animals didn't choose to be born as cows or chickens and didn't choose to be in livestock. So I think it's kind of in a similar sense. The individual child did not choose to be in that womb. So therefore, I don't think we have the right to kill said child.
So yeah, you kind of, but I think I just want some further clarity because, right, I am in agreement to the point where like I don't think innocent sentient beings, right, innocent individuals who can feel pain, who have an awareness of their life, who have a subjective experience, should be, should have their rights taken away, should be killed, should be abused, should be exploited, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for example, right, if cows were not sentient, I would have no issue with people using cows like they do with crops, right? So like the key
Okay.
thing to me is not that something or someone is, or I guess something if they're not sentient, not that something is living, right? I have no issue chopping carrots, chopping carrots, taking antibiotics to kill bacteria, spraying down my table to get rid of the germs. I have no issue with that because they're not sentient. So again, I'll ask you just for a little more clarity, why? Because
Yeah.
if we are in agreement that even conservatively 3 months into pregnancy, there's no sentience, right? It's still a developing cluster of cells. Why value the cluster of cells that aren't sentient at that point over the individual woman, man, couple, whatever decision they want to make.
Mm. I guess to clarify my position, it would be that if you let the natural proceeds occur, it will gain that sentience.
Mm.
I think that's the main issue there because, like I said, it's not comparable to like a sperm cell or a female egg that if you left to their own devices, it would just die off like any other cell, any other bacteria. But the human embryo is unique in that sense that eventually it will proceed to grow, gain that sentience even within the womb, and then of course until birth. So
Okay.
I think that the potential of sentience is what makes it more valuable than you know than outside life. Or I wouldn't say more about I would say comparable to like the actual mother and the father. So
Got it. Got it. Okay. And I figured I
yeah.
actually, when preparing for this, I figured that was the only way you could possibly go would be, going with the future potential for sentience, right? So that kind of makes sense. So I understand where you're coming from there. Now, a couple things. So I want to push you on the sperm and the egg thing a little bit. So obviously,
Yes, sir.
right? You say sperm and egg not comparable. So I think we're in agreement, right? If you just had a couple sperm cells in your hand, not a life, right? Not a human, right? Couple egg cells in your hand, not a human, correct?
Correct.
They're living, right? So those cells are still living, right? But they're not sentient, they're not a human. Okay. So now you put the sperm and the egg together. Okay. Is that a human?
Yes, I would say once you get the conception and
Okay.
fertilization, yes.
So the second that the sperm and the egg is together, they should now be treated like a full-fledged person. I think the issue with that, again, is when we're
Okay.
talking about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead if you want to clarify.
No, yeah, I would agree. Like I don't know the exact time frame from like when it actually how long the fertilization takes, but yes, I would say as soon as like that individual DNA is created, then yes, that would be its own specific human being.
Okay, so the issue I have with that, or the question
Okay.
I would ask, or let me try and think about this, because okay, so so let's say sperm and egg get put together in a petri dish. Okay, so outside of the womb, where there's no potential for you can't grow, right? There's no the sperm and the egg are not going to live. They're not going to be able to form a person without a host, right? So sperm and egg in a petri dish, is that a person, right? So they are like.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm glad you really brought this point. I was actually kind of hoping you would. And this is what, like, again, me and maybe like a lot of other Christians made, kind of butt heads as well on this. That I am very against IVF, and I think this is kind of like the same type of road. This is what this conversation would be going. Is that yes, I think it's very wrong to have embryos frozen. I think those are individual human beings just frozen in stasis, which I think is very, very wrong. And of course, I think it's amazing when people are able to actually use them and actually grow them into actual little human beings that go running around. I think that's a blessing in its own right. But to just have them frozen or to eventually just kill them off for the ones that aren't going to be used, I think it's very, very wrong. And I think it's like again, it could be another topic of conversation, but that'd be my stance as well.
Okay, so if it's not for sentience, right? Because sentience is the only reason why you care about what happens to you. You care about what happens to others. We have our own like individual desires and like what's the opposite of desires? I don't know, but we have our own
Pressures,
individuality.
I guess. Or,
Yeah.
yeah.
So because when we're talking about, and I'm not even talking about, I'm just talking about morally, right? Obviously, there's real world
Okay.
practices, but like morally, in a petri dish, right? When you put together a sperm and an egg, there's no brain, there's no nervous system, there's actually no capacity for any subjective experience at all. So, what is the moral consideration? Assuming that petri dish can't just, like, if you left it alone, it's not just going to grow into it's never going to develop sentience. It's never going to turn into a person. So, what is the moral concern in that regard, in that case?
100%. I think that's a great question, and I think it comes down to where our own worldviews would kind of like bring us to this point. Is that, of course, I come from a Christian worldview, and I think you clarified you come from an atheistic point of view, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I'm an atheist. Yep.
And then, if you don't mind me asking real quick before you going down this road, are you more of like an atheist or an agnostic, or is it? You mind breaking that definition for me real quick? That way, I don't kind of assume your stance.
Yeah. So from my understanding, atheism isn't like a firm stance against the existence of God. From my understanding,
Mhm.
atheism is saying that I do not believe in something where there isn't sufficient evidence to take it
Okay.
as truth, right? So I'm an atheist so long as like I don't think there's sufficient evidence to prove in the existence of God. Now, if there
Mhm.
ever comes a time where God is proven, I'm not, obviously, like now. Then I've got a whole lot of other questions, but yeah, that's
Rabbit hole, right?
yeah. But yeah,
Yeah,
essentially, I
100%.
don't see sufficient evidence to believe in a God, so that's why I'm an atheist.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. And I think that's what we would kind of like agree in a sense that from an atheistic point of view, if there is no God, then you're right. Morally, there would be no connection to that petri dish, that I guess fertilized petri dish.
Hmm.
Uh, but with a God, we have an objective morality. We have objective standard now, and from that standard, that what we've learned from the Bible, from church teachings, that yes, that once that individual is created, there is a life there. Now, since we live in a world, we have the capability of creating such circumstances, because obviously back in the day, you couldn't make petri dishes, fertilize eggs. That wasn't even conceivable. Nowadays, we can. That's just where the modern science has taken us. And again, I think it's wrong that we have the capability to do such things. Obviously, it's not something that was even thought about before, like I said. But I would still say that it's wrong, even though we're capable of doing it. So again, from the Christian point of view, I think humans, I think this is kind of where this next conversation can go next, is that humans do have a standout value compared to other animals, because, of course, through our scripture, we know that we're made an image of God. God put us as priority. When Jesus was walking down this earth, he never prioritized, never mentioned the possibility of animals getting saved. So it's not something that the Christian dogma really talks about. And I think that's kind of another thing that people who are watching, or the audience, might take away from this. I think that's a lot of why Christians don't really put the same value onto humans, is because Jesus himself never brought it up in any type of way, shape, or form. So I think it's kind of like a what if, right? Like if Jesus had, then man, you had a whole bunch of Christians following the vegan movement,
Gotcha.
Am I making sense?
Yeah. So what you're
Yeah.
saying, which I figured you'd go this route, is once we get into like and I appreciate, again, you do seem very good faith. I don't want to toot your horn too much, but I talk to a lot of Christians. I talk to a lot of people who are very dishonest. So I appreciate where you're coming from. You're saying that
I try.
morally, outside of Christianity, sentience seems to be the only thing that does matter, right? You're kind of in agreement with me.
Mm,
But based on the Christian
mm,
worldview, which is the one that you assign yourself to or you believe in, um, it is specifically stated that humans have a objective value outside of sentience, outside of, all these other moral questions. There's something
mm.
valuable determined by God about humans. Did I characterize that correctly?
Yes, on the dot.
Okay. Okay. So I understand your position on abortion based on the Christian worldview. And to be honest, again, I'm a vegan channel. So I mostly wanted to get you on to make sure that you could not expose any issues with my position as a atheist, with veganism and pro-choice, considering my
Mm-hmm.
nuances. But my job, like my goal here, is not really to convince you to be pro-choice or to, be not a Christian. Not only do I not
Okay.
have the credentials for that, but I don't think, I mean, as far as I know about religion conviction, it's almost impossible. So that's not really my objective.
Okay.
But what I do want, here's where I am excited to get into, is why you aren't vegan and
Okay.
why, like how that's justified and all that stuff. So, um,
Okay.
are we cool if I ask you a couple questions about that?
Go right ahead.
All
I'm
right,
all
cool.
for it.
So, and again, it sounds like you are a man of Christian faith. Sounds like, but you also do. It sounds like you do you don't deny the science, right? You do understand that, there is science supporting the sentience of humans, the brain's nervous systems, all of that is scientifically research and all that. So just so we're on the same page, and I think you mentioned this earlier, but you would agree that animals are individuals, unlike carrots or bacteria or computers, etc., right?
Correct. Yeah, I wouldn't say they're comparable.
Okay, great. Now, I'm sure, again, as a Christian, obviously you do believe that humans are more valuable than other animals, right? Which is fine. I mean, it's not fine. Like, I don't believe that, but you can believe that and still,
Right.
you can
Yeah.
believe that and still be a vegan, right? Because one thing is, which I get a lot, is people are always saying, well, I would never choose an animal over a human, or how could you compare humans to animals? Veganism or vegans, like, the position isn't asking you to choose one or the other. It's simply asking you to extend the consideration you already have for humans to other animals, right? Because of that shared characteristic of sentience, because we can all feel pain, feel joy. So I'm assuming you're not vegan, judging by your questions and stuff like that. So what could, given the context of this conversation, what's stopping you from being vegan? Like, what is it that, like, where you think it's justified to exploit animals, pay for their abuse, death, whatever? Like, what is the justification, or what's stopping you?
Yeah. So again, great question. I think it comes down to the necessity. I think that's what it really comes down to is like, is it required of me to be vegan? And from my,
Mm,
I guess from what I'm picking out, like, it doesn't seem like you are requiring people. It's like you're kind of more like advertising, or not. You're is advising a good word? Like
advocating?
you're really promoting that perspective. Yeah, like you're really like promoting that, and I think it's great. Um, I think for me it's like like how do I put this? I wouldn't see it as a requirement because I think that we had the capability to be, of course, like omnivores. I think we have the capability to do that. Um, as for full on exploitation of animals, yes, I think there are certain degrees where we would agree that are not that shouldn't be allowed. Like I'm very, of course, more in favor of local farming, like mass production farming. When you see animals in cages, of course, I think there needs to be better ways to go about this. I would agree with that. But of course, I'm not sure if you've ever seen like videos of like local farmers versus like other vegan activists. But I do believe there is a strong difference between how the animals are raised. Of course, the end result is the same, is the killing of the animal. But I do think that life that they are living is a lot more beneficial and a lot more enjoyable for the animal while it's alive versus, of course, having the same result. Um, but for me, like I guess it goes back to the value of human versus animal. It's like we need sustainment as humans. We can basically get sustained from both meat and vegetables. Obviously, we are more omnivores than carnivores and vegetarian herbivores, obviously. And at the end of the day, I think it comes down to, like I said, just the value that we as people have versus animals. Um, of course, I don't think you don't see, of course, killing the animal as humane or as respectful, of course. But I do think the way the animal lives can definitely be better.
Okay, so couple questions, and so I appreciate, yeah,
Yeah.
I appreciate where you're coming from there. So a couple things. You said it comes down to necessity. Now, when you use the word necessity, I'm assuming you mean nutritionally, or some type of, like, in order to sustain our population, some type of like practical concern. Obviously, not like a moral necessity, right? I don't think you think that, like, we have to kill animals in order to be moral, or we have to treat animals a certain way in order to, like, fulfill some kind of design or something. I'm assuming, like, is that correct? Do you mean like nutritionally?
Yeah, nutritionally, stuff like that, like
Okay.
population wise, being the whole population. Because I always think about the hypothetical of like, if let's say all of America or even all of humanity became vegans the next day, would all of human population be able to survive? Or
Yeah.
kind of like that realm. And
Okay.
I'm sure you've been asked that before on multiple occasions, probably.
Yeah. So, well, first off, I mean, just a little bit of background. Obviously, I'm going to talk about an anecdote first, and then I'll point you to some science. But I've been vegan for almost
Yeah,
8 years. Um,
right on.
nutritionally, when we're talking about just the consumption of food, right? So just food, like forget about clothing, entertainment. Nutritionally, there is not only is there no necessity for any type of animal flesh, animal secretion like dairy or eggs, but actually there's a lot of science supporting mostly, if not fully, plant-based diets. Obviously, they
Okay.
have to be appropriately planned. So you'll see a lot of like vegans who end up getting a lot of nutrient deficiencies, getting a lot of negative health effects due to their plant-based diet. And then come to find out,
Okay.
they were eating 6 smoothies a day, not supplementing, and weren't eating enough protein, weren't getting enough calories, right? So
Okay.
it is important, just like with any diet, right? Eating omnivorously, people die. Number one killer in the country is heart disease, right? And that's people eating a mixed diet. So it's not so much about like whether or not you choose to eat both plants and animal products or just plants. It's more so how you go about doing that, right? There's nothing inherent in a plant-based diet that makes you ill. It's making sure you're getting all the nutrients you need, making sure you get enough fat, get enough protein, get enough calories, all of that.
Okay.
So yeah, anecdotally, I've personally make sure I get all my nutrients. I've had no issues health-wise for the last 8 years, at least not pointed to my diet. But there is tons. I mean, I spent hours on my website in the resources section. There's a specific section dedicated to peer-reviewed science. So there are tons of peer-reviewed studies comparing meat to plant-based proteins, comparing or looking at long-term follow-up for plant-based populations, comparing the health of supplementing with supplements versus not supplementing with supplements. So there's tons and tons of studies. So that's one thing. So that's one thing. And then environmentally, right, necessity. Environmentally, I'm sure you've heard this, but animal agriculture is one of the worst things for our environment. If you think about it, how much, approximately, I don't know how, if you are, but how much you weigh, for example?
About 195.
195, right. How much does a cow weigh, right, approximately? Probably what, 5, 6, 7, 8?
Approximately. Yeah, probably like 500-600 pounds.
Probably like 5, 6 times your weight, if not more, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in order to grow these animals, they have to eat. And they have to eat a lot, right? So because I don't know if you're aware of the figures, but just for land animals, not counting fish, just land animals, it's 80 billion animals, right? So we slaughter 80 billion animals, over 10 times the human population, right? 80 billion animals a year. Now, we don't just there's no way to churn them out like in a factory, right? We have to grow them, right? And in case you didn't know, we kill them at baby age. So cows can live up to 15 to 20 years. We kill them at about 1.5 to 2 years. Pigs can live up to 10 to 15 years. We kill them about 6 months, or maybe a year sometimes. Chickens, again, a few weeks. So they are they're not like chicks, although we do kill chicks for the egg industry. I'll get into that. But essentially, we still have to feed them for months and months and months and weeks, depending on the animal. So all these animals need food, right? So if we're talking chickens, right, they primarily eat corn, soy, wheat. All of that has to be grown to feed to them, right? So a huge chunk of our crop agricultural land is fed to these animals. So a lot of our land, I think, and I have this linked on my website, but I think this was reported by the UN. I think it's I'm trying to remember the statistic. It was something like animal agriculture uses, I know it was the majority, I don't know if it was 80% or 85%, but animal agriculture uses the majority of our resources, but only supplies 18% of our calories. Right? Because most people, they're not consuming the majority of calories from their cow flesh, pig flesh, chicken flesh. They're usually eating, higher calorie, calorically dense plant foods, like pastas, like
Mm-hmm.
rices, like grains, fruits, vegetables, stuff like that. At least that's the hope, or processed foods even. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, so yeah, and I definitely, if you do care about being like getting closer to the truth, if you do care about like actually being honest, I do encourage you to check out all the resources on my website to support what
Okay.
I'm saying, because it's all there. Um, but assuming that what I'm saying is correct, just for the sake of the discussion, right? Assuming that
Yeah.
you definitely don't need animal products for nutritional health, we would be much better off, environmentally, without animal agriculture, without having to feed these 80 billion animals, raise them, give them water, give them space to
Mm-hmm.
we got to plow fields to give them space to roam, stuff like that. Assuming that's all the case, what would then be stopping you from going vegan? Because again, you can value humans more as a Christian. That's fine. I mean, again,
Mm-hmm.
fine, for the sake of this discussion. But I can't imagine, assuming that, or given that you agree that we're all sentient, I can't imagine that you think that slitting the throat of someone who can experience life as an individual, like a dog, like a cat, like a human, or when I say like, I mean almost exactly, give or take. Um, how is that justified to you? Even in those
Yeah.
backyard
100%.
farms. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I guess I was kind of not clear on like what I meant by necessity. Like I think it was more along the lines like I as myself I'm not required to be vegan. I guess that's where more like I was not. It's not necessary. It's not a necessity for me to become vegan. I guess that's kind of more what I should have been
Well,
explained.
nobody. Yeah.
Uh,
So, sorry. I just want to.
yep,
Now, I just
100%.
want to
Yeah,
clarify that really quick. Of
yeah,
course, right? Like, I'm not. Nobody's. Like, there's no necessity for me to not be a murderer or not be a racist or not be
mm-hmm.
anything. I can choose whatever I want, right? People at the end of the day, like, you can choose whatever life path you want, right? But I'm
100%.
asking based on your own values, right? Because you seem to
Yeah, 100%.
care, right? You seem to care about the well-being and the rights of individuals, right? You definitely recognize that animals are living, feeling individuals. So based on your own values, obviously, yeah, there's nothing like objective that says you have to be vegan, because I don't believe in objective
Mm-hmm.
morality to begin with. But based on your own values, why not? Like, what's stopping you, given what I said is correct?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it comes down to kind of like I was saying before is like the difference between a human life and then an animal, for example, a cow's life. We don't have the same value. And I think, like I kind of was able to talk about a little bit before, nowhere in the scripture does it tell us to have that same type of care and value for the animals. Of course, we should be respectful. We have dominion over animals, meaning we shouldn't feel the need to abuse them in any way. But we are called to basically use them to sustain us as humans, as God's children, from the Christian point of view. And I think when, again, you kind of made it clear already that for you, objective morality isn't really a thing. So at the end of the day, like I don't have, I guess from that point of view, from the objective morality, there's no issue with me killing these animals. I think the question comes down to is like, why is life in its nature valuable? And I think at the same time, of course, I think humans and for lack of a better term, livestock, I think it's a different type of value. And kind of like how I said before as well, is that the scripture never tells us that the animals that we surround ourselves with have that same value that we have. And I think that's where the Christian point of view is coming from.
Sure, sure. Well, again, I think you're mischaracterizing me a little bit. I don't mean that in a
Okay. Apologize.
aggressive way. No, no, no. You're fine. I just want to clarify, because I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah.
asking you to give them the same value. I'm just asking you to give them enough value to where you don't think it's okay to slit their throats and chop them up and put them on a grill, right? To keep them in
Mm,
crates, enslave them, forcefully impregnate them, and make them your slave, right? We're talking about like slavery, abuse, and murder. Like we're talking, or I guess if not in the Christian sense, but a killing, right? We're talking about like
mm,
three very big things, right? Slavery, abuse, and killing, right? And a couple things, right? So you said it doesn't say anywhere in the in the scripture. I agree with you. It doesn't say like you can't eat animals. Now, one thing that I always like to point out, Garden of Eden, I'm assuming you believe in Garden of Eden. A Garden of Eden was vegan. So
Correct.
actually, animals only started getting killed and eaten after sin was brought into the world. So that's a
Correct.
big thing. Also, in God's perfect world, the lion will lay down with the lamb, right? Meaning that there will be no eating of other individuals. So there is a lot of hinting and a lot of suggestion in the text, as far as I know, of the ideal world, the best world that God could come up with is actually one that is vegan. And that goes back to the modern day necessity because, right, you say we have dominion over animals, right, where we don't abuse them. And then you say God gives us the right to use animals to sustain us, right? I just want to ask you a couple questions about, I'm assuming you believe in Jesus and you look up to Jesus, right?
Correct.
Right. So,
Safe assumption.
right. So, the one question I always like to ask Christians is this. Given
Yeah.
given that in the Bible it does hint at the perfect world being one without slaughter, one without eating animals, and in our modern day we can actually have that world, right? So that world is possible. If Jesus were to come down today or come back today or whatever it is, right? If he were to show up, do you think that he would want you, or do you think he would sign off on you paying for animals to have their throats slit, paying for animals to be forcibly impregnated, for paying for all of these actions to happen to animals, when there is a clear and simple alternative to that process? Do you think that's something that Jesus would approve of, or would he approve of veganism?
So, well, I think that's two different things. I think yes, he would approve of the lifestyle, just like he would approve of any other lifestyle. It doesn't go against him. I think an important thing to remember that Jesus was Jewish. He grew up as a Jew, and this is something that was very common in the Jewish culture. Was the Jewish Passover was the killing of a lamb each year. He was very known with Scripture when he was talking about Moses telling the Israelites to cut a lamb, cover the heads or the doorsteps of their houses with lamb's blood, protect them from the Passover. So I think that he had a lifestyle that was very inclined with not putting animals at the same level as humans. And again, I think if it was that type of value, or that value did exist, it would have been mentioned in the Gospels, which is what we look towards for Jesus' main source of like teachings and of course his lifestyle. And even with the miracles that he was able to do, he produced fish for the disciples. He was able to multiply fish and bread, and even look back to his father with the Israelites making quail fall from the sky for the Israelites. So I think there would be more hints in Scripture to kind of point more towards a vegan lifestyle if that's the way God wanted us to go. And to go back to the Garden of Eden, yes, in an ideal, not fallen world, that would be ideal. We would be able to communicate and hang out with animals just like we're talking right now. But unfortunately, after sin, post sin, that is no longer a possibility. Because even in the worst or in the best case scenario, where, like I said, if mankind starting today became vegan, there would still be issues that we have to deal with that might be even worse than the way we're producing and slaughtering animals now. Obviously, we can't attest to that. We don't know what that would look like. But knowing man's nature, there's always going to be something more severe um, when a good change is going to happen, because that's just like that's the view of the fallen world until we actually reap the benefits of heaven when Jesus comes back. So as of modern day times, like I said, I think he would approve of the vegan lifestyle, but I don't think he would condemn every Christian who's had a steak, if that makes sense. I think
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
looking more like the soul issue. He's looking more towards, have you been good to your brother? Have you been faithful to your spouse? Have you been following the teachings that I was given you? I was giving to you guys when I was here for my first ministry. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So a couple things, right? So
Yeah.
you mentioned, well, even if everyone went vegan, there'd be something worse, right? I mean, that might be the case, but that's kind of like I find that kind of silly. That's like saying like, okay, if we got rid of child trafficking, well, if we get rid of a bad thing, there's just going to be something bad that comes up in its place. I mean, maybe, right? That could be the case, or
Yeah.
humanity is pretty, we're pretty messed up. But I would still choose to get rid of that bad thing and take whatever, there's usually over time we see an evolution where things seem to get better, right? More rights are granted,
Mm.
lifespan gets better, less abuse, less, for the most part, over time. So yeah, that's kind of silly to me, but I understand what you mean by that. But when I mean like, would Jesus approve? What I'm saying is, right, obviously the Bible was written, what's the belief, 2,000 years ago, or how long ago?
Yeah, by over 2,000 years.
2,000, right?
Well,
So
at least that's when Jesus was born, and then he was and that's when he was crucified. But the Bible has been able to be written throughout the kind of few centuries after his resurrection. So yeah,
Sure. So, given it's written over 2,000 years ago, obviously over 2,000 years ago, nobody could really be plant-based, right? Right. Obviously, you could have the philosophy that animals shouldn't be exploited and abused, but you couldn't really put that into practice. There was nowhere near the knowledge we have of nutrition, nowhere near the efficient practices of farming. So there was very little food security. Like, we're talking about things where people did really have to like survive, right? So, 2,000 years ago, like in the time of Jesus, it is a survival thing. So obviously, right, in the Bible, as close as, like, they say dominion, they say don't abuse animals, this and that, because they're trying to tell you, hey, we need to be as nice animals as possible, right? A century per that time. But again, when we look at you said in a perfect world without sin, like before, like in the Garden of Eden. But wouldn't the goal be to avoid these sins, to try and get to a place where those sins are not occurring? Like, if Jesus came down and he saw all of the technological advancements we've made, everything that we've done, all the efficient farming practices, like, do you really think he'd still say, okay, I know that every human can eat crops with no problem. We have plenty of food. It can totally be doable. But take this knife and slit the cow's throat, or take this gun and bolt gun the cow in the head, right? We're talking about, again, this is not like a peaceful, we're talking about a very violent action, which has been justified by humans because of survival. But I have a hard time believing that like a peaceful, non-violent, benevolent Son of God, or God himself, would actually sign off on continuing these violent practices, assuming that there's no need for them anymore. What
right.
would you say to that?
And I think I think it's important to make sure we get the characterization of Jesus kind of more accurately. It's, you have to remember, at least from the Christian doctrine. Again, this is speaking from the Christian point of view, so I understand not a lot of atheists are going to agree with this, but he still has the knowledge of past, present, future. He still has the same omnipotence as his father. Of course, it's selective, but I would say that he would still have the knowledge of what mankind was going to become. And I think that's an important distinction because, like I said, even if that wasn't the case, God himself was, still communing with Jesus during his ministry. And I think if that was a necessity at that point in time, it would be a necessity now. That's like saying, oh, there's going to be, it's a crazy one. Let's say, for example, like transgenderism today, obviously, right? It's not in specifically do not become a transgender, but he talked about the moral values when it comes to having, a man and a woman, the importance of having a spouse, male and female, the importance of protecting the children, the importance of honoring your mother and your father. These are things that he was able to highlight because he knows these are the natures of man, that despite the century, these are always going to be reoccurring. And it's true. There's nothing new under the sun, according to Solomon. The same issues that we're dealing with today were still a thing back then, just not on the scale it is today. So I think the same thing when it comes to veganism or the slaughtering of animals wouldn't be any different. It's like, for example, when it comes to were the Jewish people allowed to eat pork? No, that's because they didn't have the technology to actually produce pork in a way that's safe to consume. And in
Okay.
hindsight, you're like, wow, that's kind of crazy. But but I
So,
think it's an important distinction that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
no, sorry. I was just going to say, so what you're saying, because I've actually never heard this one before, so I appreciate it. So what you're saying is that Jesus, or God, had the knowledge, so they know what humanity was going to do in the future. So they like
Correct.
knew that we developed these agricultural practices and all that.
Uh, well, to a degree, yes. I think they knew that we would become what we are today. Because especially like it's a whole other. It's like a rabbit hole, of course. But during the Transfiguration, during the crucifixion, he died for every sin, past, present, future. So anything that was happened before Christ, anything that happened during Christ, anything that's after Christ. So he was able to see sin in its entirety. We can't comprehend it, obviously, because it's, we have human limitations. But yes, he had an idea
Well,
what
you keep
mankind
saying
was going to
sin.
become.
You say sin. So do you think that slitting the throats of animals, do you think that is a sin? Because you keep saying they can see
No,
sin.
not in the Christian worldview, no.
But do you think that, because in the Bible it says thou shalt not kill, right? Now I know he's talking about humans, obviously, yeah, blah blah blah. But do you really think, and I genuinely just want to know from an individual Christian, right? Do you really, like, if you're
Okay.
being honest with yourself? I don't know if have you ever seen slaughter footage? Okay. So do you really think that God or Jesus would look at that and say, yeah, this is fine. Let's not just eat rice and beans. Let's continue this. Like, given that we can so easily, and again, given that what I'm saying is correct, obviously you may have your own questions about that, but assuming the science is correct and we can just easily live without exploiting animals, do you really think he'd look at that and go, yeah, this is fine. Like, yeah, this is all good. And that actually, that's more of rhetorical because you've already kind of said, but that leads me to my next question. Yeah. You said God gave us dominion over animals, right? Which means we care for them without abuse, is essentially what you said. So 2 things. Number 1, why would God create these animals to have sentience, right? Give them brains, give them nervous systems, give them the ability to feel pain. Why would he instill those qualities into these animals? And if it was moral, or if like, I'm just not seeing how, given that God has instilled these animals, and he still created them per your worldview. So given that God instilled these qualities in these animals, I'm not seeing how it's justified to continue killing them, number 1. And number 2, would you not categorize breeding and bolt gunning, slitting the throats of, suffocating, all these practices that take place, all the ways that we kill animals, would you not categorize that as abuse?
Again, I think it goes back to like where we kind of have an agreement on. I think the way that we do it mass producely, yes, I think it's I think it's wrong in a lot of senses. But at the same time, we have to look at how people are doing it responsibly when it comes to like local farms, when it comes to smaller time breeding. I think when you mass produce is based on our population, yes, it's gotten to it in a very extensive degree. And I think that's just, again, it goes with our qualities as man. I think we tend to abuse things that we get in power of, long term. And I think that's kind of what the extent when it comes to trying to feed a mass population. But when it comes to morally, is it wrong to kill an animal for the sake of sustainment? No, I wouldn't say that.
Well,
now, when people we have,
sorry, go ahead. I'll let you finish. Sorry.
No, yeah, but I think when people are killing just for the sake of killing, then I think that's more disrespectful for the animal. When it comes to hunters who are just shooting buck and shooting coyotes and shooting wolves just for the sake of killing it, without trying to use it for any type of sustainment, I think I might have more of a disagreement with that.
Okay, so like sport, sport hunting.
Right.
Okay, so couple things, right? Sustainment. You keep saying sustainment, right? So we already know. So like, if what I'm saying is correct, right? Let's just grant it for the sake of the argument. Obviously, you can do your own research per my website or whatever other research you want to do. But granted that we can sustain ourselves with plants, right, with a plant-based diet, then any killing of animals for food would be for enjoyment, right? It would be out of taste pleasure, right? We enjoy the taste of certain animal flesh, certain animal products, because like saying, oh, I'm doing this to sustain myself. If you're picking the more violent option, I would hope that there's no other option, right? There's like, if you're saying, okay, like for example, if I kill you in self-defense, right? I'm killing you because otherwise I have no choice. You're going to kill me, right? But if I say I killed you out of sustaining myself, or I killed you out of self-defense, and you were not a threat to me at all, that's not really true, right? So like, if I say I kill animals to sustain myself, but there's other alternatives to sustain myself. Obviously, it's a choice, right? It's not a necessity. So given that like, again, if we grant that that is the case, then I'll ask you again, even with the local farms, every local farm, whatever like picture you have in your head, all of the animals go to the same slaughterhouse, right? They go to the same slaughterhouse. They get the same bullet in the head. They get the same knife to the throat. They have the same act of betrayal and murder, just to then use them as products. Because keep in mind, again, it's not a necessity. These local farms, they're profiting off of these animals, right? They're growing these animals to make a profit. They're growing these animals to sell to people. So again, given that we can sustain ourselves with other means, how is that not abuse?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. And well, it kind of goes back to that question I asked, like, if America starting today all became vegan, what would be the long-term use of all these animals at that point? Because obviously they've been domesticated to a point where, I mean, you might know more than I do. Like, are you able to release these animals into the wild? Will you just let them die naturally on the farm? Or like, what would be the main goal after that?
Great question. So it gets a little tricky because there's like varying, obviously people are going to disagree amongst what should happen. If you're asking me personally, what would essentially happen? Like, the reason why we have these 80 billion animals to eat in the first place is because we bred them, right? If we think about the history of like industrial agriculture, right? Or modern day agriculture, not just with crops, but with animals, right? We domesticated these animals for food security, right? Because when we're talking about hunting, not only was hunting a lot of work, you got to track down these animals, you got to, especially the bigger ones, but you run out of animals, right? The buffalo went extinct or whatever happened, Native Americans or I forgot, I don't know the full details, but we make animals extinct. If we really if we are like, oh yeah, let's just go all out, we'll make animals extinct like this. So the population, like the amount of food that humans need, the amount of like animals we need to eat or want to eat, could not be sustained just by hunting wild game, right? Their population would be gone, right? That's specifically why for hunters, they have certain seasons, they have restrictions on how many you can kill, because otherwise the population is going to go away. Like, we'll extinct deers in like, a year. We domesticated these animals for food security. So that means they're not wild animals at all. So none of these animals exist in the wild or have existed in the wild. They're like derivatives of animals that existed in the wild. But we've genetically modified them. So like, if you look at the cows, right? So the modern cow, the modern meat cow is genetically modified to get bigger and have more fat and grow larger than any other wild cow ever. The dairy cow is genetically modified to produce significantly more milk than is needed. So that way there's extra milk and there's plenty of milk for us to steal from her, right? Chickens are genetically modified and bred to get bigger, fatter, to the point where they are, by the time they're at slaughter age, they're breaking their own bones because their bones can't sustain their own weight. Egg-laying hens. So if you're not familiar, an egg is a period, right? So an egg is a chicken's version of a period. Periods are supposed to happen once a month. So a chicken, like naturally, is supposed to lay about like 20 eggs a year, right? Something along that lines, right? Pretty much once, maybe twice a month, something like that. They lay them every day, sometimes multiple times a day. So not only is it incredibly painful, but it leads to nutrient deficiency that again leads to their bones breaking, to horrific health conditions. So all of these animals are essentially living in, it's like if we bred a group of humans to have the worst diseases ever. So like, imagine if I started I don't know if it's eugenics, but or maybe that's the wrong term, but if I started like a genetic modification program where instead of turning people,
eugenics.
Instead of turning people into like Captain America, I turn them into the person where every time they walk, their bone breaks, right? We're talking like
Right.
some of the worst torture ever. So
Mm.
if you're asking like what would happen to these animals, there's a couple things. Number one, the whole point of bringing that up is we breed them, right? So their population, we control their breeding. So as the demand goes down, right? So as less and less people demand animal products, their population will slowly go down because it's not going to be profitable for farmers, right? A farmer's not going to breed 10,000 chickens if only 4,000 are demanded, right? So
Okay.
the demand will go down. And then as the demand goes down, breeding gets less. And then at a certain point, because there are sanctuaries, so there are plenty of animal sanctuaries who do rescue these animals and care for them.
Mm.
So either at a certain point there will be none of these animals left, or the animals that are left will be taken care of and naturally kind of reproducing, doing their thing on sanctuaries. And yeah, that's it. And again, these animals should not have existed in the first place, which goes back into the God thing. Like, like given the, given the
Well, you kind of put it to your own point though, is that they were created a certain way, but mankind kind of genetically modified them to what they are today.
well, so
So,
yeah,
so the way
that's
they exist.
yeah. I was gonna say
Oh,
because God didn't create domesticated animals, right? So
right.
these are human-made animals, which again goes back to the question of, it's not even sustainable to feed a whole human population off of wild animals anyway. So if we're going to the God point, right? If God would be against genetically modified animals, well, then you're going vegan, or at least you're eating vegan, because there's no way to have the animals, like the chickens you buy at the store, the cows you buy from your local farms, all of them are genetically modified. All of them have been changed to maximize profit and minimize waste, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not in the times of Jesus at all. But again, even if it was, right? So like, have you do you hunt at all?
I do not. I haven't been hunting.
Okay, but have you ever like gone hiking or gone in the woods, or have you ever come across a wild animal?
Yeah.
And what's your first like response when you come across a wild animal?
Well, depending on the size, I would say caution, but more or less, kind of like
Yeah,
veteran
a herbivorous animal like a deer, or like a I don't know, like a raccoon, or something that isn't a threat to you,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, just like usually sense of caution, but overall just admiring, and then
Right.
carry on
It's
my way.
a sense of admiration. It's like, oh, that's fucking cool. Like when I come
Yeah,
across a deer, I'm like, holy shit, I gotta take a photo. Like I gotta do something because this is awesome, right?
yeah,
When you come
yeah.
across these animals, your instinct isn't, I'm just gonna slit their throat, right? There's no
Mhm.
like violent instinct. So again, like based on your values, which overall, like we definitely would disagree on abortion. We definitely would disagree on the trans thing, on gay marriage, probably. Like we could have a lot of debates spanning, multiple months. But based
Yeah,
on your values
I'm
of,
all for
yeah, based on your values of, what's it called? Of, right. It seems like you do, based on you being against factory farming. It seems like beyond just what God says, obviously God, you're going to follow what God or what Jesus or whatever, what it says in the Bible. But beyond that, it seems
Good.
like you have some kind of compassion, right? Some kind of
Mhm.
care for the suffering or the to like that you don't want to see other individuals, whether a human or animal, suffer, right? So
Mhm.
I'm just not seeing how, based on that value, you would then say it's justified to go and slit that deer's throat when you can just go
Mhm.
and eat some rice or eat some beans or eat a different, like I'm just not seeing, when it's not for survival, how you can justify that given your own values.
Mm. That's fair. That's fair. And like I said, if you're talking anecdotally, then I would say just personally, like as as an athlete, as a strength athlete, it's just more. It's a lot more. It's feasible to do off a vegan diet, but it's not ideal, if that makes sense. Um, but when it comes to overall population sustainment, I mean, I would have, like you said, read the data itself and see, can literally America survive if they all went vegan tomorrow? And ideally, I would hope so. But even kind of like how you pointed out before, like if it's not done properly, then it leads to more clinical issues, which we would have to make sure we gain better education on that, make sure that's properly dispersed properly, and it's at the end of the day we have to make sure that what is the best course for humanity versus farm animals. I think that's what kind of like where we would differ. Like, of course, we should extend respect, but at the same time, I think we should prioritize humans first versus animals.
Sure. No, again, I don't like I said, I don't, because that line of like the line of prioritizing humans over other animals, right? Oh, hold on. We got a super chat. Recommended dose. You were too generous. They donated $5. They said it's not ideal as an athlete to have kids. Much harder. So abortion at 9 months? Question mark. Yeah, it's funny comment, but not really.
That's a little bit aggressive.
But yeah. But
you go adopt. You could give them for adoption.
Yeah.
You know. But 9 months. I mean, just.
Yeah, thank you for the donation, and everybody, please, super chats are open. So if you feel like donating, that'd be very appreciated. But back what I was going to say,
man, money.
it's a slippery slope of prioritizing humans, right? Because obviously, you have no idea how many times I talk to people and they say, "Well, I feel like I need it," right? The idea of prioritize humans, like, let's say, I think it's a fair statement to say that we prioritize ourselves, right? So I prioritize me, you prioritize you, right? But how far does that line go, right? I prioritize myself. So to save time, instead of stopping when a pedestrian is crossing, I'm just going to run them over, right? Because my time is more valuable to me than stopping and waiting for them to cross, right? And you hear that and go, wow, that's crazy. Just stop and wait, right? I hear, okay, wow, that's crazy. Just don't slit an animal's throat and eat something else, right? Because obviously when we're talking about morality, and I talk about this all the time, right now we have a box, right? And most people in that box of morality, they put don't harm or don't exploit or violate the rights of other humans, right? And even some people don't even have that box, right? But for the most part, as a society, we have that box. So right now, it seems like it's a benefit what we're doing to animals and what we get from animals. But all we have to do is extend that box to other sentient beings. And then all of our decisions outside of other animals will now be made to benefit us. So like there are so many ways that we can use the resources on this planet and use our technology to benefit ourselves besides using sentient individuals. Right? So like, just like how your brain, just from your own values, I understand you're coming from a Christian value where you kind of follow things by the book, but just thinking for yourself, thinking as an individual for 1 second, right? That the idea of putting yourself in another person's shoes, right? I would not want to kill them. I would not want to enslave this person because I can think about how that would feel for me, right? The golden rule.
Right.
Put yourself in the animal shoes, right? I'm a human. I value humans more. But if I had been born an animal, if I were in these animal shoes, would this be justified? Would I accept this? Would I want this? Because we can all raise the line further and further of, I'd be more selfish, more, that's on par with a racist being like, I prioritize white people over black people. And the actions I take are going to harm some black people, but it's fine because I prioritize white people, right? I'm all for, humans succeeding, but at what cost? Based on, morality and our own values and the harm that we're causing. Does that make sense?
No, it does. I think it's a very respectable take. I think it's like, again, I think I agree with you on a lot more than people would assume, is that we need to have the respect. We need to make sure that we're not losing our values at the end of the day. Again, I don't run over pedestrians. I'm sorry. I read one of the comments. I was like, I think it's important. I think it's really respectable. I think it's to make sure that at the end of the day, prioritization isn't abused, just like the way, like how you kind of, were able to explain and define like how we're abusing a lot of these animals on a grand level. Um, but again, I think it really comes down to that objective morality. Like, is it under the same category? Like, do we like should we extend? Like, can they comprehend the sentience that they have? Can they comprehend the state that they're in? Because obviously, like
Oh,
kind
well,
of like
now
you're
you're
saying, like
getting.
if I was a human. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, well, if you're going to play that game, now you're going to get into a slippery slope because there are plenty of humans who don't understand morality, right? So, like
Mm,
children, babies, mentally challenged people, right? So, if we're going to play like, well, do they even know they're being exploited? Well, a lot of humans,
mm.
we can get away with exploiting them without them knowing. That doesn't mean it's right, right? Do you see the slippery slope you're about to enter a little bit?
Well, again, I think that's kind of where my distinction beforehand with like my foundation is like humans are separate from animals. I think that's where it comes down to that we have an innate value that's separate from animals. So I think yes, the child can't comprehend. It's kind of like what comes to salvation for Christianity. It's like even though they can't comprehend, God or Jesus or getting saved, God's going to be just and make sure they're going to be um, judged on their actions of not getting saved because they're like 2 year olds and unfortunately something traumatic happened and they died. But God's not going to hold them at that same standard as for you and me, or for example, who can comprehend, can articulate.
No,
Yeah.
no, sure. It did. Well, likewise, I feel like he'd hold that standard to animals as well. But that's what I'm trying to ask is like, because it sounded like you were about to get into separate from the God thing. It sounded like you were about to get into like it's somehow like slitting an animal's throat is an abuse or is justified because they can't comprehend what's going on. And I would just say that you could make that argument for other types of humans, whether it's mentally challenged humans, whether it's young children, whether it's
No, 100
particular
percent.
cases.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
look, how are we doing on time? By the way, do you have like 20 more minutes?
Yeah. Yeah. We're good at time.
Okay.
I got work until 12, so you're good, bro.
Yeah. So here's what I gotta do this. We've had a great discussion, but I gotta run name the trait, because I just gotta try and extract a contradiction here because what you're saying, right, is
Okay.
what you're saying is that there's something that differentiates humans and other sentient animals that justifies the differentiation in treatment, right? So, like, okay,
Correct.
humans, I'm assuming you wouldn't pay for humans to be exploited like animals are, correct?
Correct.
Correct. Okay. So, there's something about humans that is different to animals, sorry, there's something about animals that's different than humans that justifies the differentiation treatment, right? So, animal exploitation and abuse, okay. Human exploitation and abuse, slavery, whatever, not okay, right? So, you have
Mm-hmm.
a different line. And based on this conversation, I'll give you another chance to name a trait, but based on this conversation, it sounds like the trait you're naming is um, the created in God's image or like objective morality given by God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Um, so if there were a group of humans, and now before I preface this, right, we got to be honest here because a hypothetical question is supposed to be unrealistic, right? It's supposed to test
Right.
your values, okay? So
Right.
let's say hypothetically, there were a group of humans, right, that were not created in God's image, right? They were
Okay.
created in an image just like the animals were, right? So God, he creates every human in his image. He creates animals in whoever image. That whole thing still doesn't make too much sense to me, but I'll play along. So he creates humans in his image. He doesn't create animals in this same image, and by mistake, right? He created 10,000 humans in the same image that he creates animals in. Would it now be justified to treat those people, right? To treat those other, we could call them human animals since they're not like divine humans, right? Would it now be moral or justified to treat those human animals like you treat, or like, you think it's justified to treat, farm animals?
So I think that's kind of like the key issue. Like, making sure that I'm consistent with my view is the idea like, can God make a mistake? Like I know you're trying to speak hypothetical, but we have to be true to God's character for this to work, especially with my worldview. And I would venture off to say that he wouldn't make humans that weren't in his image, like, or that we have to look at, his consistent character throughout the Bible, through the scripture. And at that same time, I don't think that they would have the same value again as you and me. But
So
if you
let
want
me
to
ask
call
you.
humans, okay,
Yeah. So let me ask you this: posing that let's say it's not a mistake. Okay, so maybe that's incorrect. Let's say tomorrow there's an
okay,
ancient text found that was written with the blood of Jesus. All right, so before Jesus
okay,
resurrected, that he buried deep underground a piece of paper, right, with it written in his own blood, and they DNA tested it, and it was Jesus' blood, right? And on the piece of paper, it said, "Not all humans are made in God's image. There are certain humans not made in God's image, and how you can tell is they have lower hanging earlobes, right? So humans that are
okay,
made in God's image, their earlobes connect. Humans that aren't made in God's image, their earlobes extend, right? So this is what's it called? This is not a mistake. This is a clear, conscious
okay,
thing. Okay. So now there's a certain population of humans that aren't made in God's image. So if the only thing separating your moral, like if the only thing that's determining whose throat gets slit is being made in God's image and having that divine value, now there are humans, or there are people, we'll call them people, who aren't made in God's image. So given that hypothetical, would you say that those people, that it is justified to treat those people how we treat farm animals?
this is a very articulated hypothetical.
Yeah, it's
Again, I know, it was like, yeah, it was impressive. I think it goes back to the, in this very, very hypothetical situation, like, for example, if we found like another Dead Sea Scroll that said like, oh, from Jesus, um, that, like I said, written in his blood, I think we have to make sure that's comparable to the rest of the scripture, because that's how we got to scripture today. I know it's kind of like a different side tangent, but hear me out. Because we've had situations like this before when we found quote unquote new scripture that was later tested and later research to say this was not the scripture. This is not true scripture. So
well,
it goes back
it's
to the
built
example
into the
of the character of,
hypothetical. Yeah, built into the
yeah,
hypothetical. This
okay,
is 100% verified. It was actually an
okay,
add-on to the original Bible. It was, let's say it was it was just ripped out, or who knows, whatever you need, whatever type of criteria you need to like back it, to like as a Christian back it. That's what it said. What like and I know, like, I understand what you're doing, right? This is called having cognitive dissonance, right? Where your values are conflicting right now because you know what the right thing to say is. I know you do, right? You know it's messed up if we say that those people should be treated like farm animals just because they have longer earlobes and it says in the text, yeah, they're not made in the image of God. I know what you're thinking. I
yeah,
know what you're saying. But the thing is, that's a contradiction, right? Because if you say, oh, no, we still can't treat them like farm animals, then being made in God's image isn't the only thing you care about, right? There must be something else, right? Maybe it's species, maybe it's intelligence, maybe it's something. But being made in God's image must not be the only thing you care about. If you would contradict yourself in that scenario.
mm-hmm. Well, I mean, because especially look made in God's image too, because people can make the argument, what about people who are born without left arms, or like, or born as amputees, or born with
Yeah.
with a deformity? It's like people make the argument as like, oh, are they made in God's image, or people who are born different races? It's like, of course we're all made in God's image. We're all humans by nature. It's what we are. It's not like looks exactly one to what Jesus looks like.
Well,
So
I have a
if I'm
question for
using
that.
that as
My question would be,
okay,
why would God
go for
make
it.
a human with no arms? That's part of my my lacking evidence for God is if God is making humans in His image, why would He give kids cancer and create humans that are born with no arms? So I mean that's for
Okay.
another day. That's another question. But
And I'm very open to come on down and talk about it.
yeah, no,
But again,
go
I
ahead,
think
sir.
it's aggressive hypothetical. It's like hypothetically, what if a triangle was a circle? It's something that's very, very hard. Like if you word it the right way, then yes, of course it'd be a contradiction at one point or another. But if we're going based on the scripture that we do have, going based on what we were able to read and articulate from the current day scripture, then again, I think the hypothetical doesn't really work, of course. But I think it still goes to back up what we Christians think today when it comes to putting the value in humans over animals.
Well, so at some point the
And
Bible.
I think that's what we're going to keep budget head, which is fair, which is fair. I mean, I'm not trying to convince you to become a Christian or eat a steak. No, I'm not trying to do that. But at the end of the day, that's where the Christian worldview is coming from. That humanity has a separate calling and a separate design and a separate distinction from the day-to-day animal that we see today. And yes, they can be sentient enough to understand their environment. They might be sentient enough to understand emotion, but you can have happiness and not joy. I think joy is something that is a human quality. You can understand right and wrong. These are things that humans in general, in our innate nature, can have the capability to do. This is something that animals will never have the capability to. I mean, you can make the argument like a billion years in evolution, can a cow become the next humanoid? I mean, you can make that argument, but most realistically, is not going to happen within, for example, our lifetimes.
Sure, but I'm just not seeing how that's a justification for abusing and exploiting and killing animals that can feel emotions, that can feel pain, that do have an awareness of their environment. Which obviously you haven't answered, but essentially your answer is, well, you're essentially saying under God, I am a human supremacist, right? You're saying I believe humans are like the most important, and based on that worldview, whatever we want to do to animals is justified. But I know you don't think that because I know you have your own lines, right? You're against factory farming. Let me ask you this. Why are you against factory farming?
Yeah, like I think it's the same reason why, like for example, like I'm not against like labor, but I'm against sweatshops. For example, like I'm not against working a 9 to 5, but I'm against using a child to make 1,000 t-shirts on the assembly line. Like I think that there's a lines on how to go about these things that
Well,
in its nature
can you
are
give me
good.
like specific information about factory? Like, why are you against factory farming of animals?
Well, again, I think it goes back to what we're talking about before. I don't agree with the enforceable insemination. I don't agree with like making them live in cages for their whole lifestyle just to be killed at the very end of their life. I think, like I said, I am more pro like local farming and like the traditional farmer raising their cattle in like local communities. I think on the mass scale we've pushed it to, I think can be very destructive in the long term.
But no, but forget about the destruction. We're just talking about as an individual, right? Because it doesn't. So like in the Bible, it says humans are supreme, right? So we essentially have whatever we have rule over animals. But it seems like you have extra. Like, what about it? What about an individual animal? Are you against the torturing of? So, like for example, if I wanted to torture an animal before I killed them for food, would you be against that?
So as in torturing as like
Inflicting
fine
extra
torture.
pain before I kill them for food, would you be against that?
Then yeah, I would agree with that.
And why? Like, what about that? Me doing that to that animal leads you to feel against that or be against that?
Again, I think, well, if we're talking about one-on-one circumstances, like I'm going to kill this cow for my personal consumption, then I'm not going to try to abuse it in any way before just killing it. Like, for
But
example,
why?
like I'm taking joy out of the abuse. Like the abuse is doing nothing for my actual physical benefit besides I'm enjoying abusing the animal,
Well,
you
so
know?
yeah, so that's what I'm asking, right? So like, I'm a human. Let's say I have a cow, right? Me and a cow, we're here. I enjoy, I feel, I get pleasure from harming this animal, right? And I don't harm it every day, but I'm going to inflict massive amounts of pain before I kill them for food, right? I'm doing it in the name of sustenance, okay? So I want to eat, I'm hungry. Right before I kill it, I'm going to pull off its limbs while it's alive, like piece by piece, right? We're talking the most pain imaginable for this animal. You're saying that you are against it because you're against it, essentially, right? But why? Like, what about that makes it wrong in your eyes?
Yeah, because I feel like there's no need to actually just torture it before you kill it.
Right.
There's no
Well, because you
there's no
recognize that.
necessity for like. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, is it fair to say that you recognize that that animal feels the consequences of those actions, right? Because you can put yourself in the position of being ripped apart limb by limb, and you could recognize, holy shit, that's awful. I wouldn't want that to happen. And you could recognize that that animal is feeling that pain. Is that fair to say?
Mm. Yeah, and I think it goes back to like how much we can need to respect the animal in the process of actually killing it. Like for example, when hunters use poison arrows to like basically slowly kill off an animal or an elk, I think versus just shooting it and actually making a quick and painless death, I think that's what it comes down to. I think there's a better way to go about things, you know.
And I agree with you where like if there's two options, kill an animal quickly, kill an animal with immense torture, the quick death is better. But what I'm trying to ask you, the reason why I'm trying to get you to answer this is because if you recognize that they're individuals, if you recognize that you can empathize with these animals and that they can experience what we're doing to them, if torturing an animal is worse than just killing an animal quickly, then how is killing an animal at all, right, for the purpose of exploiting, for the purpose of literally chopping them up into pieces, how is that not worse than not killing them and exploiting them, right? And if that action is worse, given we have alternatives, then you should be vegan, right? This is a question for your own values. You know, because if you're at that, I was going to say because you're not somebody who's saying, who cares about animals? I'm human, under God, whatever people want to do to animals, no skin off my back, doesn't matter, right? You're not that guy. You're saying, whoa, I don't want to inflict unnecessary pain. I don't want to be the cause of torture for these animals. So if you can recognize that that is worse than just killing them, then how is killing them not worse than not killing them? But I'll give you a second. I just got a super chat. Thank you, Nick. Nick Lyson, $4.99. I appreciate it. He asked the question, is it okay to lethally experiment on a talking raccoon who has been neurally augmented like Rocket Raccoon to verbally express joy and empathy? Yeah, that's a good question, right? Because your trait's it's probably not you said it's under God, but realistically, it's probably like intelligence combined with communicate. Like it's all the things that like if an animal could talk to you, would you be able to slit their throat?
If I could communicate with it, I mean, if you can make the same argument for like apes who can like use sign language, you know, like it's kind of like there's a basic communication, but to give it the same intelligence or sentience that we have, I think it's a different story. Like I don't think, like it's that argument like do aliens disprove God? Like no, I mean I don't think that would be the case. I think it would be definitely some questions there, but I don't think that if you found like alien life out there that would disprove God either way.
Well, no. So
I don't think Rocket Raccoon can get saved. I don't know if that's doable.
So like per your values, if you were about to pay for an animal to be killed for your food, and they can look you in the eye and say, "Please don't kill me. I want to live just like you." Would you find it still morally justified to pay for them to be killed?
So if he could just full on like just talk with
me? Like if he could literally tell you, "Hey, I don't want to die. Please don't kill me. I want to live."
I'd have to have some serious tests taken at that point. I like realistically, like if I could communicate, then no, in that moment I wouldn't because obviously there's a higher intelligence plus that sentience. I think there's something there. But I wouldn't put at the same value as me or you because again, from my Christian worldview, I'm like, okay, there's a demon in that pig now.
No, but look, you don't. Again, nobody's asking you to necessarily put animals and humans 1-to-1, right? We're just asking you to recognize the similarities between animals and humans, and that similarity is the capacity to feel what we are doing to them. But I think we're hitting a wall here. So honestly, I think we've exhausted. I will give you a chance after my statement just now. I'll give you a chance to ask any more questions or say what you want to say. But all in all, I think it's been a pretty good discussion. I did push you on things. You asked me questions about my position, which I appreciate. I didn't give you a chance to answer, but most people dodge. So for the sake of this first time friendly discussion, I figured I'd kind of put the pieces a little together. But there was essentially a contradiction in your view. If there were a group of humans that didn't have, that weren't made in the image of God, and that was backed by Christian scripture, which you verified that was true. You essentially said that they would still not be have the same treatment as God granted humans. So there is a contradiction there. But oh no, sorry. You said that no, you would still want to treat them like humans. So there's a contradiction. But yeah. All in all, I mean, you've been pretty good faith. I appreciate it. There was a little bit of back and forth, which is good. And I appreciate you coming on. Did you have anything else to add or anything else that pushed me on or asked me?
Yeah, I guess the last few minute thoughts. You know, there's of course a lot of things in scripture that we as Christians today we have a hard time swallowing. That's just kind of like the nature of like the Old Testament, biblical God. Like especially in today's terms, like when you think about the Passover in Egypt and God taking the firstborn of everyone in Egypt at that time. Like
Yeah.
why would God allow like
Or
firstborn
the
children to be
slavery
taken
that
away?
is justified.
Or the slavery, or like of course there's like saving them from slavery, but I think the biggest thing to kind of note is that at the end of the day, God is in control, and I think that's where a lot of Christians do have peace. Is that God is the giver of life, and only He has the authority to take life. He only has the authority to, because at the end of the day, like we think about it, if you die in your bed, like that's God basically taking your life. We don't really think about it that way, but that's basically what's happening. And I think that's where a lot of Christians kind of have that peace is that at the end of the day, God is sovereign, God is just, and God is good faith, and God is good character, and He has the free will to give us the ability to follow Him or not follow Him. And I think that's the biggest thing I kind of want to leave with this group, even yourself, because I think, like I said, you've been very good faith this whole time. I think you've been very respectful, a lot more respectful than I thought it would be. So I was like, I was really really pleased about that. But I think it's just to go out to at the end of the day, there is a God that loves everyone in this chat, including yourself, Brandon. And of course, veganism and Christianity aren't exclusive. Like you can be a full-fledged vegan and respect animals and respect this lifestyle and still follow Christ. And of course, it could be like a separate discussion if me and you want to have somewhere down the line, another live stream and like talk about God and it's like go back and forth on that. But again, He sent His Son for everyone on this chat, you yourself, and I think if you open up your mind to it and your heart to it, I think you'd be surprised. So that's kind of like all I gotta say. I love you, all of you guys. Even in some of the intense comments. But again, I felt very, very. I think it went very, very well overall speaking. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I appreciate your time here, Adrian. And I will leave everyone in the chat along with you with this. Every time that you pay for a piece of animal flesh, animal secretion, piece of animal skin in the form of leather, goose down, whatever it is, you are paying for animals to be abused, exploited, killed. They are sentient individuals who do not want to die, who have a will to live, who can feel pain, feel emotions. So whether you're Christian, Muslim, Jewish, atheist, there just really is no justification. And when we really get into it, that's kind of, there are contradictions in different views, but I appreciate it. I'm glad we had a good talk. Maybe we will link up again if there's another interesting convo. But please, for your sake, for the animal's sake, go vegan. Check out the resources on my website. I do hope that, assuming that you do find good research on my website and you do look into it, I do hope you start considering your actions and how they impact others besides just humans. There's way more different animals on the planet than just humans. So I really hope you look into that, and you can still be Christian and vegan. You said it yourself. So, but all right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone in the chat. I know it's been we actually had a lot of viewers, Adrian. I know you wasn't 1,000, but we had a good amount of viewers.
I saw a lot of comments. I was the live stream. I was like, wow, we got a good turnout.
So yeah, really interesting, great commentary. I'm going to probably read a lot of it later, but thank you, everybody. And we'll see you guys on the next one.
Yep. God bless you all. Have a good one.